for emergency situations, and that's just exactly what it was.
Let's get to it.
Now, Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And good Thursday afternoon from the Fox News deck. The fired FBI director Andrew McCabe could face criminal charges. A source now tells our Catherine Herridge that the Justice Department Inspector General sent its findings to McCabe, or on McCabe, to a top federal prosecutor in D.C. Last week, the Inspector General sent Congress a report ripping into McCabe for repeatedly lying to investigators, sometimes under oath. And last month, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, fired Andrew McCabe the day before his retirement, denying him some of his benefits. McCabe has denied that he did anything wrong and has said the Trump administration has been attacking him for political reasons. Last week, his lawyer threatened to sue the president and his team. Our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, is live on Capitol Hill. Catherine?
Well, Shep, this has been pretty tough to confirm independently because criminal referrals are meant to stay secret. But in the last few minutes, a source familiar with the referral has confirmed to Fox News that it was made by the Justice Department's internal watchdog, the Inspector General, and it was made to the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Washington, D.C. for the former Deputy Director, Andrew McCabe. And it was over evidence that he had lied 4 times to federal investigators and 3 times under oath over his role in a media leak about the Clinton Foundation. What we don't know is whether the U.S. attorney feels there's sufficient evidence to warrant a criminal prosecution. And in this case, it would be on 18 U.S.C. 1001, which is the federal lying statute. The other thing we're trying to work out, and based on my conversation within the last hour, it does appear the referral was made sometime after February or in late February. That is when the Inspector General finished his investigation of the leak involving McCabe, and we believe presented that evidence to the U.S. attorney here in Washington, Shep.
What's the status of Congress getting Comey's memos?
Well, this is an entirely fluid situation here on Capitol Hill. 2 of our contacts have said it's possible that the Comey memos may be provided to Capitol Hill at some time late today, but that is not firm. One contact has just told me in the last few minutes that while it's sort of a lot of movement with the memos, the Republican chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Bob Goodlatte, has been drafting a subpoena in order to force the Justice Department to provide those memos. You remember about a week ago, 3 committees, the Republican chairman, asked for the memos to be provided. The deadline was Monday. It was missed. The Justice Department got an extension, and that brings us to today. I think what the public wants to know is when they're going to see these memos. There are 7, based on our reporting. 4 have classified information either at the secret or the confidential level. My contacts here on the Hill have said they want to make every effort to release those memos as soon as possible if they do not contain classified information, or if the memos are provided to the Hill in a heavily redacted form, which would allow for public release. But that has yet to be decided as well, Shep.
Catherine Herridge working the story on the Hill. Thank you. There's word North Korea is willing to talk about giving up its nuclear weapons while dropping a demand that it's been making for decades. That's according to South Korea's president. He says the North's dictator, Kim Jong-un, is no longer insisting that U.S. troops leave South Korea as a condition for complete denuclearization. The demand has been a major sticking point between Washington and Pyongyang. North Korean leaders have said that they need nuclear weapons, that they need them because of the tens of thousands of U.S. troops who are stationed next door. President Trump says he'll probably meet with Kim Jong-un in early June. If so, it will be the first time a sitting American president has met with a North Korean leader. The chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, is live down in the Palm Beaches near the president's resort. John, today we've now heard from the president that there are conditions under which this won't happen.
Well, yeah, there could be. He definitely wants to make sure that, any meeting that they have is going to, bring results, and that Kim Jong-un is just not playing games. But, Shep, when you look at how the ground has shifted over just the last few weeks, it really is quite remarkable. They've gone from the hurling insults at each other and calling each other names now to the president saying there's the budding of a good relationship here. There is respect between the two countries. All of this after the CIA director, Mike Pompeo, traveled to Pyongyang over the Easter weekend for face-to-face talks with Kim. But the president insisting that the campaign of maximum pressure will be kept up against North Korea. Shinzo Abe, the Japanese prime minister, yesterday saying that North Korea cannot be rewarded, can't be given any gifts, that it has to take concrete action and that has to be demanded by all parties involved. The president yesterday in a press conference with Shinzo Abe pushing back against his critics who think that he may get played by North Korea in this meeting, saying that he is prepared to leave Kim Jong-un sitting there if he thinks the talks are going nowhere. Listen here.
If the meeting when I'm there is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting and will continue what we're doing or whatever it is that will continue, but something will happen. So I like always remaining flexible and will remain flexible here. So we've gotten us here, and I think we're going to be successful.
Well, we will see. The president is certainly sounding an optimistic note, though, about the possibility of sitting down with Kim Jong-un. Denuclearization, of course, is the major issue on the table, but there are sub-issues as well. One is the 3 Americans who continue to be detained by North Korea. Mike Pompeo brought that up in his meetings with Kim Jong-un, I'm told by administration sources. And as well, there's the issue of the 17 Japanese abductees who have been in North Korea now for an awfully long time. The president assuring Shinzo Abe yesterday, Shep, that he will bring up that matter, saying it's important to Abe, so it's important to me. Shep?
Hey, John, what do you know about the possible locations for a meeting between these two leaders?
Well, the president said earlier this week that they narrowed it down to 5. I've been trying to work my sources to figure out what those 5 might be. I've come up with 3 pretty good possibilities. One of them is Singapore, which is close to the Korean Peninsula, which may be good since Kim Jong-un doesn't really like to travel. Another one under the S letter, Sweden, and a third one under the S letter, Switzerland. I'm told as well that some other locations still under consideration, probably though far less likely, could be Vietnam or Malaysia. Again, it's how far Kim wants to go. When he went to Beijing recently, he traveled by train. There's some speculation that his aging fleet of aircraft may not take him halfway around the world. And then there's also the idea, too, that the president doesn't want to travel most of the way around the world to meet with Kim and then have the meeting fall apart. He wouldn't like the headline that resulted from that. We are told, though, by White House sources that a few places they won't meet. They won't meet anywhere on the Korean Peninsula, and that includes Pyongyang, Panmunjom right there on the border, and Seoul, and also not Beijing. White House official telling me the other day, if we had it in Beijing, we might as well invite the Chinese to the table because they'll just be listening in anyways. Shep?
John, I might be listening in anyway. Who knows? John Roberts live down in the...
It could be.
Good to see you. Thank you. Let's turn to Tara Mahler now. Former CIA military analyst, now spokesperson and senior policy advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
In the main, what do you think of this venture?
Well, the venture in and of itself is promising in that I'm always for diplomacy and getting parties to the table to talk. Having said that, we're still a long way from getting a successful outcome here. There's a lot of preparation, a lot of planning, a lot of expertise that needs to be brought to the table here. This is not a meeting you go into unscripted. This is not a meeting you go into sort of with off-the-cuff remarks. You need a clear strategy. You need to know what the United States is willing to give, what we're trying to get, and a strategy for getting there.
The idea of them talking, are there areas in which the United States can't give that give you concern about how this may come out?
There are. I don't think the United States is going to go in there with a strategy of turning over too much. My concern is that in order for these parties to get to the table and talk, you don't want President Trump to just sort of off the cuff make promises that the follow-up negotiations and talks that are going to probably take place after this with the details won't be able to fulfill. So, for example, we have obviously very strong security commitments in terms of our troops, both in South Korea and Japan. That's something the United States has been fairly unyielding on, as we should be. That doesn't mean we can't have small reductions, but to sort of go in there and yield on that front would be problematic, also for our allies in the region. And then there's also, military exercises that we do, other military equipment we have in the area. These are all things that the United States has historically had strong security guarantees for our Asian allies. So we don't want to do something that's going to create instability with our allies in the region, we can't just be looking out for United States interests. We need to be looking at this holistically as well. And then the real question, my real concern here is the verification. What does denuclearization mean? Are we trying to get them to get rid of everything? Do we know where everything is? And if we don't, how are we going to ensure that we can inspect? Or are we just trying to freeze missile launches or certain types of nuclear activity? Again, these are all things that the State Department, the CIA, the administration at the White House all need to be thinking about as they go into these talks.
Is there any danger? I mean, these two leaders sit down. What happens if the leader from North Korea, doesn't play by the rules as previously established? I guess there are risks inherent with any sort of negotiation, but in your estimation, there are risks worth taking?
I think in any negotiation, there are risks. At the end of the day, whether you're doing a personal negotiation, a business deal, an international negotiation, it's really boils down to individual personalities and psychology in terms of how the meeting is going to pan out. That's not to say that the preparation itself can't lay the groundwork for a successful meeting, but you're absolutely correct. We're dealing with two, I'd argue, fairly volatile, unpredictable personality types. This is an unprecedented meeting. And I know President Trump has made comments that if it's not going our way, he'll walk out. But that can have ramifications, too, in terms of our national security and what may or may not prompt that sort of outcome for the meeting. So I think it'll be interesting to see. The other thing nobody's talking about is, are there cameras in the room? Who else is going to be present for the meeting? It's going to involve other people. Is there going to be a transcript? Is there going to be any part of this that's public? All things that we need to be looking at as we approach the meeting, whenever it may end up being.
Tara Mahler, thanks so much.
Thank you.
The first vote is just days away on Mike Pompeo's nomination to be the Secretary of State. Pompeo is facing opposition from at least one Republican, but his chances of confirmation just got better thanks to one particular Democrat. The details on that coming up from the Fox News Deck on this Thursday afternoon. The U.S. Senate is pushing ahead with President Trump's pick for Secretary of State, and we just got word of a Democrat who's now helping the cause. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee is set to vote Monday on Mike Pompeo's nomination. It is simply not clear whether the panel will have the votes to officially recommend the CIA director for the new job. But either way, the entire Senate is expected to vote next week. Republicans have obviously a very slim margin. Senator John McCain is home in Arizona getting treatment for brain cancer, so Republicans can afford to lose but one vote. The Kentucky Senator Rand Paul says he is a no, so there's the vote. President Trump called him out over it yesterday. And the senator met with Pompeo today, but so far, no indication that anything has changed. Rand Paul is, for now at least, a no vote. Then there's Arizona's Jeff Flake. He has not said which way he's voting, but Fox News has just confirmed the North Dakota Democrat Heidi Heitkamp will vote yes on Mike Pompeo. So that, if you will, sort of cancels out Rand Paul's no. There's more to come on this. Let's bring in Elena Treen, who's a reporter covering this for Axios. Does it look like overall a confirmation is probably going to happen, or are there other Republicans, Jeff Flake, for instance, who may vote no?
There's definitely a lot of undecideds. I think that the important thing to look at, too, is that before we learned that Mike Pompeo had gone to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong-un, it was looking much more unlikely that he would get confirmed. But now a lot of conservative groups, the White House, McConnell, are using that meeting to show that he's already negotiating on behalf of the president and that he's basically doing his job. Let him finish it out as Secretary of State and get this meeting done with President Trump. And now as we head in, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is going to vote on this on Monday. And as you said, it's still unclear. There's a lot of Democrats opposing him. 9 of the 10 Democrats on that committee really don't want him to be Secretary of State. The only Democrat who's undecided is Chris Coons. But so it's looking now like it might not get that favorable recommendation. The first time in about 100 years this has happened for such a high-level cabinet member. It looks like he's not going to get that recommendation. But it seems that there are the votes now on the full Senate floor to do that.
Is this purely politics? Why should the sitting president of the United States not have who he wants as a Secretary of State? What is the beef?
Well, what a lot of Republicans are arguing is that this is completely partisan politics and that it's really a national security interest and a national security liability to not have someone like Pompeo or anyone else in that position for Secretary of State, especially with this North Korea meeting coming up and being on the table.
What is the complaint? Is it about human rights? Is it about what is it?
A lot of people, most of the complaints that we're hearing, especially with the people who had voted yes for him to be CIA director, like Tim Kaine and Senator Shaheen, they voted yes for him to be CIA director. But now that he's up for Secretary of State, they're saying it's more of a policy decision and that his stance on some of these, like you said, human rights issues, he's against a lot of LGBT issues, reproduction rights, his views on the Muslim community. Those are all things that a lot of Democrats are saying they can't get behind for a position like this.
The issue of Islam is one that's come up repeatedly. How has Mike Pompeo, when asked about that, he seemed to try not to answer it on confirmation hearing day?
Right, and it seems like he's still trying to stay away from that. Really what's happened is, and he said this with a lot of these different issues that people are targeting him on now, he's saying that despite his views and some of, like I said, with the LGBT community as well as with Islam and the Muslim community, he says despite what he believes, he's not going to let that determine what he does in this role as Secretary of State, and he never let that get in his way while CIA director with anyone from those communities who were serving on his team.
So his point is, I may have some divisive personal opinions, but I'm not going to let them get in the way of my job?
That's exactly his point, while the Democrats argue that it's basically unavoidable to let your divisive opinions get in the way of that.
Well, we'll watch the votes. It's not settled yet. Republicans seem to think that it's probably going to happen, but you don't know till they cast the votes. It's good to see you, Elena. Thank you.
Thank you, Shep.
All right, ahead, we'll take you to the Syrian border to hear firsthand accounts from those who say they survived a chemical weapons attack, including one man who says doctors warned that they could treat only people who had a chance of surviving. The harrowing story coming next. Inspectors are still waiting to reach the site of that suspected chemical attack in Syria in the town of Douma near Damascus. A State Department spokeswoman said just minutes ago that the United States now believes the Russians are helping the Syrian regime clean up the site before inspectors can get in there. Now we're hearing from people who say they survived that attack.
We were sitting in the cellar at dinner time, around 7:30, and we started to hear a lot of shelling sounds. And after that, we started to smell chlorine, a very strong smell.
One had broken the roof and was stuck. The barrel was about 5 feet long, yellow and made of thick metal.
I couldn't see with my eyes because of the tears. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't take a breath. My heart started to beat fast. My daughter started to turn blue.
I ran to the basement and found my children and my wife on the ground with foam at their mouths. I carried my children to the hospital.
Everybody died. My wife, my brothers, my mother. They are all dead.
Doctors said they only had room to treat those who had a chance of survival. They left the others to die.
Well, some people who say they survived that suspected attack have crossed into Turkey, where they're talking to our Benjamin Hall. One man says he saw one of the suspected chemical weapons up close. Ben's with us now from Turkey, near the Syrian border. Ben, tell us about the conversation, if you would.
You know, Shep, a few days ago, Fox News found out that some of the first survivors from this chemical attack were crossing into Turkey. They had escaped from Douma and they were heading up north. We got down here as soon as we could, and we've been listening to some of their stories. There's been such a concerted effort on the part of the Russians, the Iranians, and the Syrian regime to pretend that this did not happen, that we wanted to come and get first-hand evidence. And speaking to them, it leaves little doubt in your mind that this was indeed a chemical attack. And that's coming from a reporter myself who has spoken to many survivors in the past. The symptoms are all true. We have seen the videos on their phones. The videos that we see here are not the ones we can show you on air because they are too graphic. And that is one of the things that is such evidence for us. But they come across the border and many are too afraid to talk. They fear for their families who are back in Syria. They fear for themselves as they're trying to escape. but you hear graphic stories, people who have lost entire families. As you were hearing in one of those sound bites there, people who are cowering in cellars in the middle of the night as these bombs drop, and these very indiscriminate basic barrel bombs which can't be directed, so they're not being targeted at anything. You hear about the young babies, and you see images of babies who have died, and despite the accusations of some of the supporters of the Syrian regime, there is little doubt now in the international community's mind that this was indeed a chemical attack, and it was carried out by the Syrian government. And that's based on a number of reports which tracked Syrian government helicopters over the buildings which were attacked, knows that they were there at the time, and that they dropped those specific bombs. And I think you saw some of those images there. So being here on the ground is such important reporting for those reasons. Shep?
What's the excuse for prohibiting access to inspectors?
Well, you know, the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, has been here for 4 days already, and every day they've been trying to get into Duma. Yesterday, they came under some gunfire, and that was blamed on rebels. But we know, having spoken to people on the ground, having spoken to rebel commanders in Syria, that there was a deal done with the Russians and the rebels in Duma to evacuate and bus out all rebel fighters. And that was a consequence of the gas attack itself. We know there aren't rebels in the area anymore, and so that story just doesn't stand up. And if you want more stories about how Russia and Syria and the Iranians are trying to cover this up, we have heard from people on the ground that they have found the graves of the people who died in those attacks, and they have taken the bodies away so they can't be tested. They have intimidated the doctors who were at the hospital who tested and treated these patients. Their families have been threatened. Samples that they may have tried to get out were taken from them. And so there has been a concerted effort on the part of Syria and its allies, it appears, to keep this story under wraps and to prevent evidence getting out. And what we know is that samples in clothes and in the ground only last for 2 weeks. Beyond then, they can't be tested. And it's 12 days since that chemical attack. In 2 days, there is a good chance that at the site of that attack, you will no longer be able to test for those nerve agents.
Reporters having a hard time getting in too, right?
A very, very hard time. A couple of friendly reporters have gone in the last couple of days with the Russians, and of course they have come back and said that they didn't see anything at all. Reporters like ourselves have had a much more difficult time. We have been trying to get in for some time. We've come up across a number of different barriers. We have people on the ground who are willing to take us in, but we cannot get across, and of course they're keeping it closely under wraps. But we try to bring everything we can from here, and the evidence is really mounting from what we're learning.
Benjamin Hall, our man on the ground there. Benjamin, thanks so much. All the best. The FBI offering up to $1 million for help finding the American journalist who's been missing in Syria for 5 years now. His name is Austin Tice. He's from Houston. He disappeared in August of 2012 while covering Syria's civil war. A month later, a video surfaced showing armed men holding him blindfolded. Tice served as a Marine and has reported for the Washington Post, McClatchy newspapers, and for CBS News. His parents say they believe he is still alive. Some of the heroes of the deadly Southwest Airlines flight talking about those scary moments on board and their decision to jump into action. Plus, another engine issue forcing an emergency landing. This is a new one. What happened in this case? Coming right up. It's Fox Report time. Headlines from the Fox News deck. Prosecutors in Bill Cosby's retrial questioned their final witness today. A doctor testifying Benadryl could cause serious sedation, blurry vision, and other side effects. Benadryl. Cosby has admitted that he gave the accuser over-the-counter drug to help her relax. She says that he drugged her and molested her. He's pleaded not guilty. Investigators in Russia say they've released surveillance video now that they say shows a former spy's daughter before she flew to the United Kingdom, where she and her father were poisoned. They say they retraced her trip from her home in Moscow to the airport and found no evidence of poison. British officials blame Russia for the poisoning. Russia denies any involvement. Robots in Singapore completing the seemingly impossible task of building IKEA furniture. Scientists say it took 20 minutes to put the thing together. Duty firefighter who helped pull a woman back inside that damaged Southwest Airlines plane says he is no different than any other firefighter in this country. Andrew Needham says that he simply felt a calling to get up and do something. But first, he said he got the okay from his wife.
I looked at her eyes, and she basically gave me the approval to go back there. In fact, I think she may have told me to go.
I'm very proud of him. This is a calling that he has, and he did amazing.
Needham also expressed his condolences to the family of the woman he pulled back into the jet, Jennifer Reardon. She later died despite his and other passengers' efforts to save her. Our Leah Gabriel with the news, former fighter pilot, just like the pilot who safely landed this plane. Leah, we're hearing from other passengers who tried to help as well.
Yes, Shep. You know, after Needham and another passenger pulled Reardon back into the plane, he began CPR. Well, another passenger, Peggy Phillips, was a registered nurse for over 20 years, and she jumped in to help. On Fox and Friends today, she described Reardon's injuries as substantial. Listen.
At that point, you don't think about it anymore. You look at it, you assess the scene. And Andrew was already giving compressions, and I told him that I was a registered nurse and that I would assist him, and we traded out. I attempted to establish an airway. I didn't feel like I ever got an airway established very well. There was no pulse.
But they stuck with it anyway. Well, Phillips says that that's just part of being a first responder. And we've now also heard from the captain and the first officer who passengers have been praising. In a statement, they said, quote, "We all feel we were simply doing our jobs. Our hearts are heavy on behalf of the entire crew. We appreciate the outpouring of support from the public and our co-workers as we all reflect on one family's profound loss." And they said, Shep, right now, they're just really focusing on the investigation.
What are you hearing in the way of details on that investigation?
Well, Shep, you know, the NTSB said that an engine fan blade broke off mid-flight, had been showing signs of metal fatigue. So in other words, microscopic wear and tear on that fan blade. Now, the agency had been working to collect parts that came off the plane in flight, like these pieces of the engine cowling. We're also learning that last year, the engine manufacturer recommended ultrasonic inspections of certain fan blades within a 12-month period. Now, that was after the same type of engine failed on a Southwest flight 2 years ago. You can see here how the damage from the two engines compare. Southwest Airlines pushed back on the inspections, saying it needed more time to do them. Now, the FAA has not yet made those inspections mandatory, but now says that it will in the next 2 weeks. And Shep, we should mention that it's not yet known if the engine that failed on Tuesday would have been inspected under that directive had the FAA made it mandatory.
All right, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Another scare in the sky to report. A Delta plane set to fly across the Atlantic Ocean had to turn back around, make an emergency landing because of engine problems. That's according to the airline. Here's a video a passenger took out the window. You can see some black smoke pouring out the wing there. Happened just a few minutes after takeoff from Atlanta last night. Close to 300 people on board, the airline tells us. Nobody hurt. The Federal Aviation Administration reports it's looking into what may have caused whatever this is. Another view from across the runway. You can see crews hosing down that jet after it turned around and landed. Delta reports safety is always its top priority and apologized to its customers. For the first time in more than half a century, Cuba has a president not named Castro. The National Assembly announced today that they selected Miguel Diaz-Canel, the first vice president of Cuba, to lead the island nation. He was a heavy favorite because he was, well, the only candidate. He replaces Raul Castro, who took over for his brother Fidel 10 years ago. But whether it brings actual change to the communist nation is very much an open question. Steve Harrigan is live in Havana for us with more. Steve?
Shepard, this was really a Soviet-style ceremony from start to finish today. You had 604 members of the National Assembly all up on their feet, clapping in rhythm. Of those 604, 603 of them voted for the single candidate. That's a win percentage of 99.8%. And Diaz-Canel, in his acceptance speech, said he did not intend to change anything on the ground. Now, that's one thing both sides seem to agree on, those who support the regime and those who bitterly oppose it, especially lawmakers in Florida. They said this election is more like a selection, that it changes nothing on the ground here in Cuba. As for the new president who takes office today, He's not a reformer by any stretch of the imagination. He's basically been a bureaucrat rising in the Communist Party for the past 30 years. He is known to oppose small private businesses that have opened across this island of 11 million people. But it's not really clear that the policy of no change with the state Cuba's economy is in today is really going to work to keep someone in power here. Shepard?
Steve Harrigan in Havana. Steve, thanks. Honoring the former First Lady Barbara Bush. And in the days ahead, our nation will pause to remember and celebrate her life. Barbara Bush, of course, died at her home in Houston on Tuesday. She was 92 years old. The funeral set for Saturday. Today, folks have been paying their respects at a private visitation, and tonight, Houston is planning a public celebration of Mrs. Bush's life. Last night, City Hall lit up in blue to honor her. The mayor says that was her favorite color, and he's encouraging people to wear either blue clothing or a string of pearls in honor of her memory. Our Mike Emanuel is live in Houston this afternoon. Mike?
Shep, good afternoon to you. Many folks are wearing blue. Others are wearing pearls in honor of former First Lady Barbara Bush. I'm standing in the Barbara Bush Literacy Plaza, named for her after her many years in the White House and in the 25 years since leaving the White House dedicated to her work on literacy. We've seen folks stopping by to sign posters, paying their respects to Mrs. Bush, also signing condolence books. There's been quite an outpouring of love from the city of Houston toward Mrs. Bush and the Bush family. I asked one woman who had written a tribute what Mrs. Bush means to her.
She's been incredible as both a role model for reading and as somebody who's really been an advocate for literacy. Before Barbara Bush, we had first ladies who were interested in education, but none that actually promoted literacy itself. She was the first to do that.
Also behind me, you can see some flowers and some photos of Mrs. Bush here in the Literacy Plaza, named after her, people paying their respects here in the city of Houston to their First Lady. Shep?
Give us an idea, Mike, of what's coming up in the days ahead.
Well, we've got Mayor Sylvester Turner and also faith leaders gathering across the street in front of City Hall tonight. The weather here in Houston is perfect, and so we are expecting a large crowd to gather tonight for the city to pay its respects to celebrate her life. That sets the stage for tomorrow at St. Martin's Episcopal Church, where the public will get to pay its respects, the public visitation from noon to midnight. And that, of course, sets the stage for the funeral on Saturday, which will be private and feature the current First Lady, Melania Trump, coming down to pay her respects, former Presidents Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary, former President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle, and, of course, a couple of former presidents named Bush and their family paying their respects to Barbara Bush. Shep?
No doubt. Mike Emanuel live with us there. And everyone who knows her tells us what Barbara Bush would want us to talk about today is the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. It was her calling. Dana Perino and I will be heading to Texas as the nation says goodbye to the former First Lady. Dana will anchor the Daily Briefing live from Houston tomorrow, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 1 o'clock in Houston, and I'll have